Okay, so get this, right? Billions, like billions of dollars, just poof, vanished, gone.
Gone.
Not stolen, not lost, but like spent in ways that make you just scratch your head and you're like, what were they thinking,
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what we're diving deep into today.
Right.
Lee Zeldin's time as the head honcho at the EPA.
Oh, yeah.
It's a story of budget cuts and canceled grants and like enough controversy to make your head spin.
For sure.
So we got a whole stack of sources here.
Okay.
We've got news articles, political analysis. We've even got a podcast interview with Zeldin himself.
Oh, wow.
And our mission, should we choose to accept it,
I'm ready.
is to figure out what Zeldin actually did at the EPA.
Okay.
Was he like a hero, swooping in, cutting waste? Or was he a villain who, like, gutted all these environmental protections?
I mean, that's the big question, right?
Huge question.
Yeah.
So are you ready to get into it?
I am so ready. Let's do it.
All right, so let's start with the man himself, right? Lee Zeldin. Who was he before he took the helm at the EPA?
So his path to the EPA, it's a little unexpected. We're talking like Army officer, lawyer, congressman. He even ran for governor of New York.
Wow. So did he just get, like, tired of all that and decide to, like, tackle the EPA?
Well, maybe not tired, but I think his background might explain his approach a little bit.
Okay.
So, like, think about it. Military experience, it often really emphasizes efficiency, right?
Right.
And then his time in Congress, I mean, that could have made him kind of skeptical of, like, how the government spends money,
So maybe he saw the EPA as, like, ripe for a shake.
Exactly, and shake things up. He did Zeldin. He came in swinging. He proposed to slash the EPA's budget, are you ready for this, by 65%.
Wait, 65%.
65, seriously.
Yeah.
I know government agencies get a bad rap for, like, overspending, but that's a lot. Like, what was the reasoning behind such a huge, huge cut?
So he basically claimed that the EPA was bloated, inefficient, that there was all this money being wasted on grants and programs he considered, totally unnecessary.
Yeah. And that's where those vanished billions we were talking about.
Oh, yeah.
That's where they come in.
Okay.
So Zeldin, he teams up with this agency called the Department of Government Efficiency.
Okay.
You ready for their acronym?
Oh, there's an acronym. Okay, lay it on me.
DOGE.
Wait, DOGE, like the meme.
No kidding. And together, they went on this mission to cancel grants that they considered wasteful.
Oh, okay.
Like, we're talking over $60 billion gone.
Okay, 60 billion. Like, if I had that kind of money,
Right.
I
We should stay focused.
Okay, you're right. Back on track.
So the question is, ruthless cost cutting, or was he actually gutting like really essential programs?
Yeah.
So one source, they described these grants as gold bars that were just like handed out by the previous administration, right? So it's suggesting this idea of like extravagance and excess.
So we've got Zeldin. He's slashing budgets, canceling grants left and right. He's painting this picture of the EPA as just like completely out of control with taxpayer money.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing not everyone was like thrilled about all of this.
You are catching on, my friend. You are catching on.
Okay.
So Zeldin's supporters, they were saying, he's making the agency more efficient. He's freeing up all this money for like, other important things.
Okay.
And they also argued that that his focus on deregulation, which is basically just like removing or loosening government rules on businesses, right?
Okay.
They said this would boost industries and create jobs.
Okay, I mean, that makes sense. But if he was so focused on, like, cutting waste and stuff, why target environmental programs? Like, isn't clean air and water important for, like, a healthy economy, too?
It is. That's an excellent point.
And what about the people who weren't fans of this whole approach?
Right. So you have to consider the other side.
Okay.
So environmental groups and scientists, they were deeply, deeply concerned.
I'm dead.
They were saying that slashing the budget would just cripple the agency's ability to, like, enforce laws, to monitor pollution, to protect public health,
Yeah.
And then there's this whole other controversy over the endangerment finding on greenhouse gases.
Okay, break that down for me. Endangerment finding, what is that?
So basically, it's a legal determination that says, like, greenhouse gases, they're a danger to us, to our health and the environment. Right. It's basically the foundation for a lot of, like, climate regulations.
Oh, okay.
And Zeldin wanted to overturn it.
Right.
Yeah, he said it was based on, like, bad science and that it would just hurt the economy.
Whoa, so we're talking potential, like, long-term impacts here, not just like, budget cuts.
Right.
But how do we make sense of all of this? Like, where do we even begin to, like, unpack the consequences of all these actions?
That's where tools like PESTLE and SWOT analyses come in handy.
Okay, remind me again. PESTLE, that stands for.
Okay, so PESTLE is political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal factors.
Oh.
And when you apply PESTLE to Zeldin's EPA, each one of those areas presents like potential benefits, but also serious risks.
So it's like a political chess game, but with the environment as the board.
I like that, yeah.
Okay, so give me an example.
So think about it. Politically, Zeldin's alignment with President Trump, it gave him a lot of support, right? But it also made him like a huge target for his critics.
Okay.
Economically, deregulation, it might lead to like some short-term growth, but it could also cause some major long-term damage to the environment.
Right, right.
And then a major threat, and this is where like PESTLE and SWOT kind of meet up, was the growing public awareness of climate change, right?
Yeah.
Which made his cuts to environmental programs increasingly unpopular.
So it's like trying to walk a tightrope, trying to balance all these like competing interests.
Exactly. And then on top of that, you have SWOT analysis, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Okay.
And it just adds another layer, right?
Yeah.
So one of Zeldin's strengths, like a big one, was his political experience. It allowed him to kind of like push through his agenda, even though there was all this opposition.
Right.
But then a weakness was that his budget cuts were like incredibly unpopular with a lot of people.
Yeah.
He had this huge opportunity to like completely reshape the EPA.
Yeah.
But the threat of climate change, I mean, that was looming large.
Okay, so we've got political battles, budget showdowns, and the looming threat of climate change. This is getting pretty intense.
Yeah.
But you mentioned something earlier about a podcast interview with Zeldin where he talks about the Flint, Michigan water crisis.
I did.
That seems like a bit of a curveball.
It is. So in that interview, he's talking to Tudor Dixon, and Zeldin actually highlights the progress that was made in cleaning up the water in Flint.
Go.
And he takes some credit for it. He says the EPA under his leadership was like key to making that happen.
Okay, so maybe Zeldin wasn't all about, cuts and deregulation.
Yeah.
Maybe he genuinely wanted to help the people of Flint.
It's possible. But we have to consider the context.
Oh.
Like, he was facing a lot of heat for his environmental policies.
Mm-hmm.
So highlighting a positive story, something like Flint, would have been strategically advantageous,
So maybe it's a bit of both, like a genuine effort, but also some savvy political maneuvering.
It's certainly a plausible interpretation, and it shows just how complex this whole issue is,
Yeah.
It's rarely black and white, hero versus villain.
Right.
There are often multiple motivations at play, and understanding those nuances, it's crucial to forming like an informed opinion.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We've talked about budget cuts, canceled grants, the endangerment finding, and then even this potential success story in Flint, Michigan.
Uh-huh.
It seems like Zeldin's time at the EPA was anything but boring.
That's for sure.
But before we get too deep in the weeds, maybe we should take a step back and ask the big question. Why should all of this matter to our listener?
Right.
What are the key takeaways here?
That's the heart of it, isn't it? So first, I think it just highlights how crucial the EPA is to safeguarding our environment and our health.
Yep.
Whether you agree with Zeldin or not, there's no denying that the agency's work, it impacts all of us,
For sure. Okay, so we've established that the EPA, it plays a really big role in protecting our environment and our health, right? So what else should our listeners be taking away from all of this?
Well, I think the second takeaway here is that it underscores the importance of government accountability and transparency, right? We're talking billions, literally billions of dollars here. So we need to make sure that money is being used wisely and effectively.
Right. That makes sense, especially when we're talking about something as crucial as the environment, right? It's not just about saving money, it's about investing in our future.
100%. And this kind of brings us to the third takeaway, and maybe the most important one.
Yep.
Zeldin's time at the EPA. It forces us to really think about our values as a society. Okay? How do we balance economic growth with environmental protection.
Yeah.
How much are we willing to sacrifice, in the name of progress? These are questions we all need to be asking ourselves.
Yeah, those are some really big questions, and they're only going to become more important as we face challenges like climate change and stuff.
Exactly.
But let's be honest, this whole EPA saga, it feels a little bit like a history lesson. Didn't something similar happen back in the 80s?
You're thinking of the Reagan administration.
Okay.
Remember Ann Gorsuch-Burford?
Vaguely. Didn't she try to dismantle the EPA?
She did. Reagan appointed her as EPA Administrator, and she was all about deregulation.
Yeah.
She slashed the budget. She relaxed enforcement of environmental laws. She even tried to, sell off public lands.
So basically, Zeldin 2.0, but with shoulder pads and big hair.
Well, there are definitely some parallels there, but what's really interesting is how it all played out.
Okay.
Gorsuch-Burford's approach, it was ultimately a disaster. The EPA was just crippled, pollution increased, and there was a huge public outcry.
Wow.
She ended up resigning amid a scandal, and Congress had to step in to, restore funding and oversight.
So it backfired, spectacularly. Are we saying that Zeldin's EPA is headed for a similar fate?
It's hard to say for sure, but the similarities are definitely there.
Yeah.
I mean, Zeldin's budget cuts were even more severe than Gorsuch-Burford's, and he faced the same accusations of, putting corporate interests ahead of the environment.
But let's not forget, Zeldin also had that potential success story in Flint, Michigan, right?
Yeah.
So does that complicate things at all?
It does. It does. So while the EPA under Zeldin's leadership did play a role in addressing the Flint water crisis, it happened after years of neglect and mismanagement.
Right.
So it's not a clear-cut victory,
Yeah. Okay. So where does all of this leave the EPA? I mean, is it just doomed to be a political football, kicked back and forth between administrations with different agendas?
Mm-hmm. It's definitely a risk, but there's also reason for hope.
Okay.
One thing we've learned from history is that the public, they care about the environment.
Oh, absolutely. People want clean air. They want clean water, a healthy planet.
Yeah.
They want those things for themselves, for their kids. It's not a partisan issue. It's a human issue.
Exactly. And when those things are threatened, people tend to, mobilize and demand action from their elected officials.
Yeah.
We saw that with the backlash against Gorsuch-Burford in the 80s, and we're seeing it now with the growing movement for climate action.
So you're saying public pressure can be a powerful force for change.
It absolutely can.
That gives me a little bit of hope.
It should, and it's something that policymakers would be wise to heed.
Yeah.
If they ignore the public's concerns about the environment, they do so at their own peril.
I hope they're listening, but
Yeah.
but let's be realistic. Protecting the environment, it often comes at a cost, right? Regulations, they can be expensive. Sometimes they can slow down economic growth.
True. But we also have to consider the cost of inaction, right?
Yeah.
Pollution, climate change, all those environmental problems, they can have devastating consequences for human health, for ecosystems, even for the economy itself.
So it's a balancing act, trying to protect the environment without harming the economy.
Precisely. And that's where the government's role is so important, right? It can set standards, provide incentives, enforce regulations, and make sure that businesses operate sustainably and responsibly.
But if Zeldin had his way and drastically cut the EPA budget, wouldn't that make it so much harder to do all that?
Absolutely. Cutting funding, cutting staff, it weakens the EPA. It limits their ability to monitor pollution, enforce regulations, and respond to environmental emergencies. It's like trying to fight a fire with a garden hose.
Okay, that's pretty alarming. So if the government isn't stepping up to protect the environment, who will? Where do we go from here?
That's where the role of individuals and communities becomes so crucial. We can't just rely on the government to solve every problem. We need to be proactive in our own lives.
So we're talking about more than just recycling and driving less.
I need to think bigger. We need to hold our elected officials accountable. We need to demand policies that put, sustainability first, and we need to support businesses that are environmentally responsible.
So it's a collective effort. We all have a part to play.
Yeah.
But it's easy to feel overwhelmed. One person can't make a difference when we're talking about these huge global issues. You know what I mean?
I get it, but don't underestimate the power of individual action.
Okay.
Every choice we make, what we buy, how we vote, it all has an impact.
Yeah.
And when we make conscious decisions that align with our values, we create this like ripple effect that spreads outwards.
So it's about changing our mindset, like seeing ourselves not just as consumers, but as citizens who are responsible for the planet.
Exactly, and that's why this whole deep dive into Zeldin's EPA, it's so relevant, right? It
Yeah.
forces us to confront these big questions and think critically about the choices that we make, both individually and as a society.
Okay, so we're back, and I'm still kind of processing everything we've learned about Lee Zeldin's time at the EPA.
Yeah.
It's a wild story with billions in canceled grants, these political battles, and that whole debate about balancing economic growth with, actually protecting the environment.
What really strikes me is how Zeldin's time at the EPA, though it was definitely controversial, it really reflects those like bigger questions that we face as a society. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
it makes us think about the role of government, like individual responsibility and just the long-term impact of our choices.
Yeah, and we've touched on some pretty heavy stuff, like the possibility of another environmental crisis if the EPA is, weakened and stuff like that.
Right.
So before we wrap up, maybe we should give our listeners some practical advice, like what can they actually do, to make a difference, even if they don't have like billions of dollars to throw around.
Yeah, it's easy to feel like powerless when you look at the big
Yeah.
picture, right? But there are definitely things we can all do.
Okay.
So first and foremost, educate yourself.
Okay.
There's a ton of information out there about environmental issues,
Yeah.
from climate change to pollution to endangered species. Like the more you know, the better choices you can make.
So ditch the doom scrolling and find some reliable sources.
Exactly. Read books, listen to podcasts like this one, of course,
Oh,
follow
yeah.
experts on social media. There are so many ways to learn and to stay engaged and once you have like a good grasp of the issues, you can start taking action in your own life.
So what kind of actions are we talking about here? Give me some specific examples.
Sure. So, like, think about reducing your own environmental footprint,
Okay.
right? Even simple things like recycling, conserving water and energy, choosing like sustainable products.
Okay.
It can all add up.
Okay.
And don't underestimate the power of where you spend your money.
Yeah.
Support businesses that are committed to environmental responsibility
Okay.
and let those who aren't know why you're taking your business elsewhere.
So vote with your dollars, basically.
Exactly. And of course, never forget the power of voting in elections, right?
Right.
Support candidates who prioritize environmental protection and hold your elected officials accountable for their actions.
Because at the end of the day, this is about our future, right? Like the planet we leave for our kids and grandkids.
That's what it all comes down to, and that's why it's so important to have these conversations, to engage with the issues, and to take action. We all have a role to play in building a more sustainable future.
Well said. Well said. But before we get too sentimental, I have one last question.
Okay.
Remember all those canceled grants we talked about? We said that, billions of dollars were cut, but we never really got into like the specifics. Like
Right.
what were those grants actually funding and what happened when they were like, canceled?
That's a great question, and honestly, one that needs more digging.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the sources we have today, they don't give us the full picture.
Okay.
But it's a perfect example of how this deep dive is just like the beginning, right?
Yeah.
It's raised more questions and it's sparked more curiosity.
So it's not just about the answers, it's about the questions too.
Exactly. That's the beauty of learning, right?
Yeah.
It's a journey of discovery that never really ends. So
Yeah.
so if you're intrigued by this story, I encourage you to, do your own research, follow the money trail, and see what you can uncover.
Consider that a challenge, listeners.
Yeah.
Go forth and investigate those canceled grants. Let us know what you find. Who knows? Maybe you'll uncover a scandal, expose a corruption, or even discover a solution to one of our biggest environmental problems.
And if you do, please share your findings. We're always eager to learn more and to keep this conversation going.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground, but there's always more to explore.
Always.
Remember, knowledge is power, and by staying informed, engaged, and active, we can all make a difference. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Until next time, stay curious.